Welcome, everybody, to We the Parents podcast, episode 2 with North Carolina Representative Dennis Riddell. Dennis, how are you this evening?
Doing good, Chris. Thanks for the invitation to join you tonight.
Man, I'm very excited to have you not only with me, but as my second guest. I'm very excited to have a legislature, which is the people that we need to be talking to about shared parenting, because we need to make some changes and we need to make them as soon as possible. Now, like I like to always preface, I know a little bit about you, but nobody knows you better than you. So why don't you give our audience a little bit of background on who you are, how long you've been in the General Assembly, and some of the work that you've been able to do while you've been in our House.
Okay, briefly, my primary career was as an engineering officer in the United States Merchant Marine. So that meant I worked in the engine room of large commercial ships, container ships, like the ones you would see in Charleston or Norfolk or perhaps Wilmington. And I did that for 35 years. Interspersed in there for about 7 years, I taught high school social studies for 7 years in Alamance County. And then retired in 2013 from the engineering work and started doing some freelance thermal imaging. That was a tool and technique that I learned about during my engineering days. I have a camera that senses heat much the same way our eyes detect light. This camera senses heat, so you can look inside a control panel on a motor or some kind of electrical application. You'll see if there's a balanced load across maybe, say, 3 phases, or you can see if there's a hot spot developing that you can catch before it goes critical.
Yeah.
And then in 2012, I managed to get myself elected to the State House in North Carolina, House District 64, which is mostly the western and southern side of Alamance County. That was something that came up my last year of sailing. And just in conference with my wife and family, we decided it was a good opportunity and ran the campaign, and the Lord blessed us and we won. And I've been now in Raleigh just at the beginning of my 5th 2-year term. Fantastic experience. It's probably one of certainly be one of the highlights of my life, the privilege to serve in the North Carolina General Assembly. I'm proof positive that you don't have to be a super genius to be in the legislature, though sometimes we prove that with some of the things we do.
Or an attorney.
I'm from the real world.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit about me. And then, of course, you and I made acquaintance within the past year when you shared with me part of your story.
Yeah.
A stunning story to someone like myself who's unfamiliar with child custody matters. I've been very blessed to be married to my wife, Polly, now coming up on 39 years. We have 8 children, 1 in heaven. The others are all adults and probably about as sane as I am, and doing well, and all living in North Carolina, close to home.
That's great. That's absolutely great. So, we had met during one of a mutual friend, a young man who's running for district court judge, and he and I sort of were the ones speaking about family law issues, and he's an attorney. Although I think he does some family law. He has a practice now where he has another gentleman who does the family law aspect of that for him. But he's done it. He's been through it himself. But that's sort of how I met you during the election season. And we met outside, I guess the municipal building in Graham. And very nice gentleman, and Julian introduced me to you, and I was like, okay, well, I need to speak with this gentleman too, especially if he gets voted in again. And other than seeing your signs out and about, we hadn't really met, and I didn't really know who you were. I didn't know anything about politics or the General Assembly or any of this family law stuff until I went through it myself. And we were able to speak in your office a few weeks ago. Oh, by the way, I got a $20 ticket for parking outside. I still need to pay it, I think. I don't know.
Can't help you with that one. Sorry.
I don't know. Yeah. So, it was well worth $20 because we got a lot of information. You shared some information with me that I'm going to share with our audience. Because what's happening in North Carolina as well as other states is there is a lot of family law stuff that's going on where shared parenting is not being encouraged like you'd think it would normally be. Like you said yourself, there was a lot of things that I shared with you, and I can tell you from my experience that I'm sort of a I would say like a low totem pole of issues. There are a lot of cases where it's even more high conflict, even more expensive, especially if they know how much you make, and they'll come for everything that you make. Child support. I've been to jail. I've never been in jail my entire life until I've gone through the child support system and all those things. And so I was able to see the inside of Alamance County Jail for one night and then released because I was actually falsely arrested. And that's an issue I'm going to have to address as well. But so we went over in your office. You were so kind as to present me with a shared parenting law, which you guys actually passed in the 2015-2016 session. And I'm going to pull that up for our audience and see. You should be able to see it as well. Let me see if I can share that real fast. So everyone can go along with it, but and get us back on the screen here as well. And for those of you who are watching this can probably see it on a larger screen, but I have it in front of me. And Dennis, can you read it on your screen, or do you want me to read it from here?
You can read if you like there. I've got a copy here
Yeah.
with me, so we're good.
Would you like to read it, since it's a bill that you co-sponsored, correct?
This was the Senate bill. I co-sponsored a House companion bill. They're identical, and both bills were run simultaneously, and the Senate bill got the fastest legs under it, so it made it to the finish line first.
Okay. Would you mind sharing this? This would be like story time with Dennis.
Okay, gather around, boys and girls. So this is Senate Bill 519. It was filed in the Senate, you can see, on March 26, 2015 with the Principal Clerk's Office. The title is Presumed Shared Parenting. The primary sponsor is Senator Brent Jackson, and he is still serving in the Senate. And I'm just going to read the bill as titled, a bill to be entitled, an act to amend the laws pertaining to child custody to incorporate presumed shared parenting standard.
Right.
Now, what you see, since this is a bill that's introducing new information and changing existing law, everything that has a line through it was existing law at the time.
Right.
Everything that is underlined is the proposed changes. So for those who are not familiar with this, anything that has a line struck through it, anything that is out is being amended out, basically, of the law, and anything that has an underline is being added in. So you can see there's 5 portions of this shared parenting bill. And also, just as a word for your viewers, Chris, you can go to the NCGA website, which is ncleg.gov, and there is a place where you can look up a bill by number for any of the past many years that we've been in session. I was looking up some bills earlier today that kind of were precursor to these bills.
Correct.
That I found out about. But anyway, number 1, going to the amended text, this would be new material. It says, it shall be the policy of this state to, 1, encourage focused, good faith, best interest, and child-centered joint parenting agreement. Oh, sorry, I'm missing a little bit there on the edge.
Fine.
Can you bring it over?
I'll try and scroll over here a little bit. There we go.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. I'll begin again. Encouraged focused, good faith, best interest, and child-centered joint parenting agreement development while reducing needless litigation over child custody matters. Number 2.
Well, let's talk about each one for a second. And if you don't mind, I'll kind of go through this because I read some of this with you, and I'll just speak from my experience. Encourage. We all know what the word encourage means. Encourage focused, good faith, and child-centered parenting agreements to reduce needless litigation over child custody matters and to promote the best interest of the child. So the best interest of the child standard is used throughout the family law system. It's basically an undefined term, and then who defines the best interest of a child? Well, obviously, probably their parents do within certain limitations of, let's say, abuse. Obviously, we have laws that protect against abuse, but as far as parenting style, how you raise your kids, where you raise your kids, whether your kids sleep on a couch or they choose to sleep in a bunk bed, or how they dress, or any of those things are not left up to the state. So the best interest of the child um, is a very broad stroke of a pen to say that a state court judge has the opportunity to determine what the best interest of the child is based on their discretion. Now, that is a big issue in family law, and leaves a lot of gray area for what I would call, and I'm bold enough to say it, sort of judicial abuse, and abuse of parental rights and children's rights. So, I can tell you in my case, and I'm not unique, that there has been no encouragement of or good faith in child-centered parenting agreements, no reduction in needless litigation over these matters, and the best interests of my children have not been met. So that's just my experience. Again, I've spoken to hundreds of people personally, and I'm sure there's many more here in the state of North Carolina and other states. So go ahead if you want to read number 2.
Okay. Number 2, allow and encourage parents to take responsibility for their child by setting the expectation that parenthood will be a significant and ongoing responsibility, requiring the creation of a joint parenting agreement.
Okay. So when you guys wrote this bill, and I don't know who came up with the language exactly, and maybe you could enlighten us on that, but joint custody or joint parenting does not mean shared equal parenting. It means joint, which means that it could be 60-40, it could be 70-30, 85-15, or 90-10. It just means joint parenting based on what should be a parent's ability, whether they have a career in the military, whether they, I used to be a restaurant manager and I worked nights and weekends and 50, 60 hours a week, depending on where you work. Some people are truck drivers. Some mothers are nurses. And so that's to determine a schedule based on, let's say, willingness to, once a relationship ends, a parent or both parents have the right to change careers, to take a pay reduction, to work less hours, so that they can now become a single parent. Whereas, there may have been a situation where you were together, one parent may have worked more than the other, or both parents could afford jointly a situation with a daycare program. But once parents split up, adjustments need to be made. And now you have two single parents. So in my case, I changed careers so that I could be a single father, which means I had to find something that allowed me to work a day job and be off weekends, something like that. So when I did that, I was ridiculed and punished as if I intentionally chose to make less money to pay less child support. And one of the things that we're going to discuss too is how fathers or mothers could be put on child support before custody is even um, figured out, which you would think you'd put the cart before the horse, uh, and kind of have a custody agreement figured out before you determined what sort of financial assistance is going to be needed on one side or the other. So that's sort of my take on that, where we use the language um, joint. Joint custody is a unclear term. It doesn't mean equal or anything like that. So, and that's again discretionary by the judge. Number 3, if you wouldn't mind.
All right, number 3, establish laws, programs, and court practices that encourage and support the maximum participation of a child in the parents' lives, regardless of the parent's present marital status, subject to laws regarding abuse, neglect, and dependency.
Okay. So when we say establish laws, programs, court practices that encourage and support the maximum participation of a child in parents' lives, regardless of parents' present marital status. So typically, what we found is that unmarried parents or children born out of wedlock, which is on the rise, um, the parent, typically the father, because women carry a child, did not have parental rights. He had to file for those rights, like I'm doing. Um, and unfortunately, again, going back to number one, there hasn't been a reduction in needless litigation. And this has been going on for 2 years. When I used to be able to see my kids every day, I've now been reduced to a visitor at best, and no phone calls for weeks at a time. So again, I'm just sort of giving an example of my story as I've read this for the first time, and sort of was like, Dennis, this isn't happening. So number 4.
Encourage both parents to share equitably in the rights and responsibilities of raising their child, even after dissolution of marriage or unwed relationship.
So obviously the term equitably means equal.
Usually.
And that means parenting time. Yeah, usually that means parenting time as well as financial.
Right.
Okay.
That's how I
So
would understand it.
yeah, so the last one, so right there at the end it says after the dissolution of marriage or unwed relationship. So like I said, you have about 40% of roughly children being born out of wedlock. So to see that put in there was a big thing for me, because as I said before, prior to this, or even in other states, I don't know what their language is or if they have this language, unwed fathers had to file for paternity, and then if they were questioned, they had to do a DNA test and all that stuff. So the last one, if you want to go ahead and read that, and then we'll finish up with this bill and sort of chat with maybe the audience. I got a few comments that I can pull up here for some folks that might have questions.
All right, number 5, the last of these points. Ensure that a child will have maximum contact with both parents through a presumption of shared responsibility, unless it has been established based on a preponderance of the evidence that one of the parents is unfit or obstructs a healthy relationship with the other parent.
Okay. So so preponderance of evidence. What is preponderance of evidence?
It's not evidence beyond the reasonable doubt like you would find in maybe criminal cases. That's kind of as I understand it, the baseline for civil cases is who has the most evidence in the fact.
Right. So, and in family law, does that just mean that it's like 51, as long as there's a majority of evidence, or because like you said, it doesn't have to be without the shadow of a doubt like a criminal case?
I'm not sure. One of the things I've come across as I've been researching this since we started engaging more seriously this fall and into the new year is looking at other things that were proposed in the House and the Senate in the immediate recent past, let's say. And I went back to 2014 and looked, and there was a couple of bills, one that I co-sponsored again, coincidentally, that established a rebuttable presumption that shared parenting was the way to go. Now that bill never got through committee. I'm not sure why, but my colleague, a young woman who sponsored it, was at the time Representative Jacqueline Schaefer, a brilliant lawyer, and she was all over these kind of family issues back then. Establishing the 5th point What I'm looking at in the actual statute is a little different from that fifth point that you just that I just read for you. Can we go back to
Right.
that, Chris?
Yeah, let's pull that back up for you.
Because I've got the statute in my hand right here.
Yeah, let me pull that back up on the screen real quick for you and pull this off. So number 5, can you see that there?
I can, while people are looking at that, I'm going to read what the statute. So this was obviously changed after it was introduced. Some of the language maybe in one or the other of the 5 points as well. I just caught it on this fifth one.
Right.
But it was changed, obviously, probably in committee as it went through the process of going through the Senate and the House together. This is what it says in the actual statute. Encourage each parent to establish and maintain a healthy relationship with the other parent when such is determined to be in the best interest of the child, taking into account mental illness, substance abuse, domestic violence, or any other factor that the court deems appropriate. So you see the presumption of shared responsibility phrase has been removed in this process. And that's interesting to me because that was the basis basically of that one bill I mentioned from Representative Schaefer that specifically said there would be a rebuttable presumption that shared parenting it should be the norm. So that was altered. And I'd have to go back and look at the different drafts and see exactly where that took place.
Sure.
But it's quite different in statute than it appeared in the bill, which is honestly, it's not unusual for bills to be changed rather dramatically sometimes as they go through the committee process and you get more eyes and more opinions on it. So that's not unusual in itself, but just the language there was changed away from the presumption of shared responsibility more to just encouraging everybody to play nice.
Yeah. Now, after reading just these few things that were just entered a few years ago, it seems like it has a lot of positive intent. However, some of the things and unknowingly, unless you've sort of been someone who's gone through this process, wouldn't realize that the language is the detail of the language is very important, because when you go into taking into account mental illness, substance abuse, domestic violence, or any other factor that the court deems appropriate. Well, let's talk about how the court can remove a child from you because one, mental illness is going to take a lot of money to prove. You're going to have to hire people. You're going to have to go through all this stuff. Substance abuse. Well, I've told you in my story that during my relationship that I guess you could say I abused alcohol to the point where I did have too much to drink, and I got a DUI. My kids weren't with me. I was by myself. It was a poor decision. Many people have gotten DUIs even from having a couple glasses of wine, and just it's not very hard, Dennis, to blow over a 0.08. I'll tell you that. But domestic violence, domestic violence that should be proven that someone has a criminal history of domestic violence, or is this a false allegation that false allegations prevent custody from parents all the time. And when you go into the other factor, any other factors that the court deems appropriate, that gives the state a lot of the parental custodial rights and sort of takes it away from the parent, which, my constitutional rights should be protected over the court's opinion. It's not the opinion of the court to tell me how to raise my children. It's not the opinion of the court. If I can run for General Assembly and help you legislate in the next couple years or whatever, how is it I can run for General Assembly, or I could be a police officer, or I could open up a daycare. I could have more children. But I can't raise the two that I have currently, because what if a judge decides that I'm not in the best interest of those two children, but I can go be stepfather of the year to somebody else's kids? So we live in the United States of step parents, and everyone's allowed to be a step parent, but there's profit in and going into, and we'll sort of segue into Title 4D and child support. There's profit in high conflict court battles that pick a winner and a loser and have one parent be the custodial parent, which means the one that has the primary amount of time and the one who receives child support. And a non-custodial parent, which basically reduces what was once a loving, fit parent, maybe not perfect human being. I'm pretty sure none of us are. But now the court has now interjected and said, look, I think the kid's going to be better off with just her. So you're better to just go to work and pay for your child, and he or she will raise the child. And as we know through studies that have been done over decades, that shared parenting, the closest thing to equal amount of time, is in the best interest of children. That's not disputable. It's not disputable by an attorney. It's not disputable by a judge. They aren't psychologists. They're not scientists. They're not. This is a court of law. Unfortunately, family law sort of presides in a realm of discretion rather than, it's not like you're going through due process for him. There is no due process in family court. There is no jury of my peers. A false allegation can keep someone from their children. But you aren't ever taken to criminal court for any of this so-called behavior, So when we talk about, and these are all things that like you said, you weren't aware of. You're very blessed to not have been part of this craziness. Unfortunately, there are over 25 million Americans plus who deal with this, and it's growing.
Chris, let me just point out for the people who are maybe going to hear us our conversation. I remember when I handed you this copy of the general statute
Mm-hmm.
and asked you to read it, your response was, "I've never seen this before."
Right.
And I was dumbfounded. I thought, how could somebody have so many repeated hearings and appearances over these matters and never be informed of what the statutes governing the whole process entails? How could that happen?
Right.
That seems to be a hole in the procedure and the process. And I don't know whether I don't give legal advice, and people I know, attorneys, don't give engineering advice. It's a mutual agreement we have.
Right.
But I'm just curious as to how that can take place when
Well,
this is the law. This is what's known by the major principals representing people.
Well, that's an interesting factor. It's not like it's not like I can get a judge on here, Dennis, and especially an active judge or an active judge in my case. Transparency is on the low, if at all, probably non-existent in family law, which is civil matters or public hearings. We go into talking about Title IV funding and the financial incentives that I didn't realize. Growing up, I thought child support was for dads who didn't want to take care of their kids, who couldn't take care of their kids because of work or something like that. So obviously they had to help with the financial end of taking care of kids. What I've learned quickly is that what's happening is, because there's no clear definition of best interest of the child, because there's things like judge's discretion, because there's not limits. So, like on this bill, it says to resolve in a timely manner, reduce needless litigation. But unfortunately, this isn't being followed. This isn't being followed by my attorneys at the time. They're not being followed by her attorneys at the time. It's been a lot of continuances and excuses, and my kids have had to endure a lot in the last 2 years, and I've had to endure a lot, and we need change sooner than later. Like, this is a major issue, and we can talk a little bit in the future about the systemic issues of having your kids kept from you, of having, we're talking about depression, anxiety, mental health, behavioral health, all the things that are caused by fatherlessness. I'm not raising my kids for the most part. I'm a every other weekend, Disney dad is the term they use. And it's not like I'm not fit. It's not like I've been charged with a crime. It's not like any of those things. And Dennis, I've run out of money, and I'm not special. Like I said, I've been bankrupted. I was put in jail, and all I am is a person that wanted to end a bad relationship and continue to be responsible for my kids, but also raise them. But as we mentioned that, we talk about Title IV funding. Now, what did you know about Title IV funding?
Very little prior to our conversation.
Right. So what it is here, and I'll pull this up so everyone can read this as well, and I'll go ahead and read this. This was a surprise to me. Title IV funding is a federal incentive. It's Title IV-D of the Social Security Act. And this is your language that you had sent me. I thought it was appropriate, so I just copied and pasted from the information that you sent me from your research team. Title IV-D funds are federal funds provided to states through Title IV-D of the Social Security Act, a federal law that requires every state to provide child support services. The purpose of child support services is to ensure that parents who do not have physical custody of their children as the result of a court order referred to as a non-custodial parent, me and many others, provide financial support for their children. For every dollar North Carolina spends on child support services, the federal government generally reimburses the state 66 cents. And that varies, I believe, state to state. The table below provides Title IV-D federal funding estimates for North Carolina and Alamance County for the past 5 fiscal years. The source for these estimates is the county budget estimates estimates prepared by North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Social Services. So we're going to go into the fiscal years here, and this is the federal funds for North Carolina, for the state. And you're looking at, Dennis, what do you feel, knowing what Title IV funding is, knowing what we've talked about, and you see this number? I can tell you how I feel, but what was your reaction when I asked you to look into this and you saw these numbers?
Expensive. It's expensive for everybody in North Carolina.
Right. Right. And does this not look like, and I'm not an attorney, but I do read, and is this not representative of a conflict of interest when it comes to even this shared parenting bill that I agree could have some improvements on it.
Mhm.
However, some of the language is pretty good, and when you incentivize state funding and encourage it, sort of it gives the opportunity to discourage shared parenting, so it's counterproductive.
Now, I think what you're seeing here too is the gradual escalation of the expenditures. I interpret to mean that there's been a increasing number of these type needs for these types of funds, meaning less parents actually involved with their children and other people paying for someone else's child to have food, to have clothing, to have shelter, that sort of thing.
Right.
We're simply shifting responsibility from those, in many cases like yourself, who could do it,
Right.
to the state and hence to the federal government, meaning everybody else in the country.
Right. Well, would you have believed that someone like me, and you don't know me very well, but I think you might be a good judge of character.
I don't know. I'm a politician. You better be careful.
You're not a real politician. But is in your opinion, in your opinion as a father, as a grandfather, and as a human being, as a legislator, as a teacher, as a everything that you are in the 60, how old are you, sir?
64.
64 years, District 64. In your expertise, in your opinion, should fathers like myself, and I'm not a special case, I guarantee you that there are thousands and thousands more like me in this state alone, if not more. that are going through this. And what's happening is they're losing their kids because the state makes more money by making me a visitor.
You know,
And
just
the
about
attorneys.
just about every social pathology, the ones that you and I spoke of in the office, whether it's drug addiction, whether it's a propensity to violence, whether it's becoming a victim of abuse, either
Right.
sexual abuse or physical abuse, becoming drug dependent, of dropping out of school, having experiences with maybe the juvenile court system, the propensity, the correlation between a young person experiencing that and coming from a fatherless home is almost a perfect one correlation.
Right.
It's extremely high. You know that, and I know that other people do.
Yeah.
So, if just from a financial interest, if no other interest involved here, but just a financial interest, wouldn't it make sense to be keeping dads connected to their children
Sure.
in as many cases as possible and trying to, all of the documents, the data I read is that kids just do better when there's two adult parents, their mom and dad involved in their life. They just seem to
Right.
have better outcomes.
Right. Right. So, Michael has a question, and you may know the answer to this. Where does the federal funds go once they're received by the state? Do you have any idea where these funds go?
These funds are probably, I would think, run through North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, probably,
Right.
and then down to the counties according to their need or according to their application for
Social
reimbursement for the funds.
services, yeah, social services, things like Medicaid, all these expenses that are paid. Um, Instead of allowing me to raise my kids like I was before, and I never needed state assistance,
Mhm.
um, you get a financially unfit parent to file for assistance, which automatically puts the other parent on a child support regimen, and that child support is essentially essentially welfare recovery money.
Mhm.
So instead of allowing me to raise my kids, the state is raising my kids financially, and I'm recouping that money's being recouped through child support. Um, instead of me and her sharing insurance, which is not cheap, but instead of us splitting that expense, or at least working it out to where it's equivalent to maybe our incomes, and at least taking care of that, because my children are on Medicaid, I was put on child support.
Right.
But in order to maintain that child support, there's only one other thing that can happen. I must be reduced to a visitor. Because the more time I get with my kids, the less money they get from me. And that entire setup, the fact that child support is based on your income and not the true economic out-of-pocket cost of raising a child. Dennis, I was paying upwards of $1,750 a month while making $2,600 a month. And that's because her attorney was allowed to lie about my income. And there was nothing I could do about it. I said my piece. I spoke up. The judge didn't care. There was no evidence that I made the money that they said, other than Facebook posts. I guess he just liked their story better. I didn't come in with an attorney, and I was railroaded and bankrupted within a year. That is not okay to do to fathers, mothers, or children, because now my children have two very financially unfit parents.
You know, our system of government is based upon three branches. We have the legislative branch that I'm privileged to be a part of, where we make the
Right,
laws we've just read. You have the executive branch, and they're charged with executing or enforcing, carrying out the laws according to the intent of the legislature, as long as
right,
they're not in violation of the federal or state constitution in any way.
right,
And then lastly is this very critical component that you've run up against the wall in, and that's the judicial. And a lot of times it comes down to a judge making a decision based upon the law, which they read to mean, it's the best interest of the child. That's the standard in North Carolina. It's not, it's encouraged, to do a shared responsibility,
Right.
but the actual one person explained it to me as the North Star for North Carolina family custody matters is what's in the best interest of the child, period.
Right.
And a judge has to discern that in the courtroom. And I don't know how they begin to pick up the pieces of a shattered, relationship when there are children involved and make a determination like that. It requires kind of a Solomonic uh, level of wisdom because you can't split the baby in two.
Right.
You got to somehow it's going to be spending the whole child's going to be over here and the whole child's going to be over there.
Right.
What percentage of the time? It comes down to the determination of the judge. So be careful who your local judges are and who you put in office in judicial positions because they can have a tremendous impact.
And that's another thing I think we need to work on. Now that you mentioned it, wasn't in my notes, but you brought it up. Is you know, ending immunity for these judges and
Mhm.
literally holding them accountable. Whether we need to be able to remove them for judicial abuse. What's happened in my case is absolutely absurd. It's absurd that in the United States of America or any country that this is possible, and
Mhm.
literally bankrupting good parents for ending relationships, even divorce. I mean, we need to change the laws. The problem is you said, like, I remember you said earlier that you're not sure why it didn't pass. I guess
Mhm.
another a bill that was or a set of legislation that was introduced. The biggest, and I think we spoke about this in your office, is two of the biggest lobbyists against shared parenting are your domestic violence groups who say, all women are or all men are, if you're accused of being violent, then you must be violent. You must have done something. But I'm not being locked up for anything. No one's trying me in a criminal court for hurting anyone. And feel free. I'm willing to go. Um, so false allegations are allowed to be made. And when those false allegations are disproven or never proven, we are not punishing those who make those false allegations. So, that was one of my things to make mention in my notes about some things that we need to include.
Mhm.
There is no fear. There's only benefit for, um, and I've had people tell me that attorneys have told their clients to say this. I had a restraining order put on me for doing nothing. All I did was file for custody, and 6 days later, I had a restraining order put on me. That's absurd. And all that did was put me behind to one. I had to hire an attorney because I was so scared to go in there and argue my own case, even though, I mean, I can go in there and be like, Your Honor, she's lying, you know? And I can tell you that it's very intimidating being in a courtroom, even when you're right. Because there's a lot of little tricks and there's a lot of relationships in those courts. Um, the other thing is, like I said, the immunity of judges, this arbitrary ability to wield power over someone who hasn't broken any laws. That happens in family court all the time. Like I said, I can go be a pediatrician, and you know if you have children my age, I could marry your daughter and have kids with them, and you know it's all good.
Mhm.
But for some reason, in these family courts, they make determinations without due process, without real cause, and it's all about money.
We we have in just different areas, different fields, whether it's law enforcement, um, other professions, where you grant a measure of immunity to people acting in a civil authoritative position for
Right.
certain actions, and that's a good thing. You don't want them harassed because something didn't go somebody's way in the courtroom or something like that. You don't want police being held uh, I don't want to say accountable, they're held accountable every day, but you don't
Right.
want them to be persecuted for doing their job. Because all the
Right.
police are, they're our collective organization of our right to self-defense, to
Right.
lawful defense. We hire police to do that for us. That's what the law enforcement's about.
Right.
So I don't have a problem with the immunity to begin with, but in legislation that I've worked on, there's always a series of phrases that are put in certain legislation when you're dealing with giving people power and authority.
Right.
And that is, if there's any kind of willful neglect, abuse, things like that, then the immunity is gone,
Right.
and you can be sued. Now, you'll probably be defended by the civil court system, the government, or the county, whoever you might
Sure.
work for. But that's a layer of protection too. And you've run across the horrible scenario. I don't know what to tell you about that. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving advice
Sure.
to anybody about the legal situation. I'm trying to remedy what I think is an imbalance
Right.
in our law.
Right.
And
Well, here's the problem, Dennis. When you remedy this imbalance, and Ryan Goodwin mentioned the Bar Association, that's your other group, your
Mhm.
domestic violence group and your Bar Association. Imagine if you reduced litigation like your bill says, that is law. Imagine how much money the Bar Association is going to lose, attorneys are going to lose when you can now you're going in 50-50, and the burden to prove otherwise is on them to show that I'm unfit. So right now, like in my case, and like I'm sure I'm not special. So, I have a temporary order that was made permanent, and I've never had a hearing. I'm an every other weekend dad, determined by no hearing, by no due process, by nothing other
and
than games being played by attorneys and a slow court system. We would unburden a lot of the backlog of these family court disputes if we had a rebuttable presumption of 50-50. If parents knew that, all right, look, you're starting at 50-50, it's also going to reduce the conflict. It's also going to it's going to greatly reduce conflict. A lot of the conflict that I've dealt with in the last 2 years has been during the process of fighting for my kids. I had the cops show up, Dennis, on Friday to the parking lot in front of my dad's restaurant where you were there,
Mhm.
and I got to see my kids on an extra day. And I decided to keep them at a daycare. There was no school that day, and spend the afternoon with them because I had off. So I kept them overnight on Thursday, and I decided in the morning I told her I would bring them to their daycares. But in the morning, the kids had said, Daddy, can we stay with you? I said, I'll let your mom know that I'm going to keep you and that I have you with me here. And anytime she's ready to pick you up because it's her time, um, when she gets off work, that she's willing to, I'll meet her. And that turned into me basically, I guess, disobeying an order, not a court order, her orders. And she used Burlington's finest to come to, along with her new boyfriend, who was not in the best shape physically. It looked like he maybe hadn't slept in a while. Let's put it that way. And they came, approached my car. I left the kids in the car. I didn't know what to expect. And the police arrived for no other reason. And all it did was traumatize my children who were in the car. I spoke with the police. They understood the situation. I explained it to them. And they're like, there's really nothing we can do. So those who are, the police are there to serve and protect, but really they're not serving or protecting. They're usually filling out reports after the crime is committed. And they really can't interject with what's happening in my situation, because what they want it to do is to go to court. So technically I didn't even have to give the kids back, but I'm not going to do that with the kids and make it all a thing. But she would have had to. They can't get me for kidnapping my own children, but she could take me to court for contempt if I didn't return them. But she was using words in front of my children like kidnapping, hostage, and withholding in front of my children. And this is because the system doesn't help prevent high conflict situations. A lot of your issues that take place during long custody battles, months, years, take place because the matter is unsettled. So that's my experience. I'm not special. We need to do something big and something different, whether it be this session, whether it be next session. I'm hoping I don't have to go another 2.5 years in court fighting for my children. Or I'm going to keep doing this, and you and me are going to keep talking, and we'll get some other legislators on here. I will see if I can get some attorneys. Her attorney's free. I would love to have you and her attorney and me and an open conversation about the realities of the situation and stop abusing our kids. This is abusive. None of what's happened to me and what's happening to other North Carolinians is in the best interest of anybody. The only people it's been in the best interest of is attorneys and the state that profits. And that's my experience.
I don't know which end of that to pick up, Chris.
And you speak on anything you want to. I mean, this is the truth, Dennis.
It's just not
This is the reality that we're dealing with in our state and in pretty much every other state.
right.
There's a few states, Kentucky being one, Arizona being another, and I believe Florida, that has a fairly good presumption of equal custody, unless there's some sort of a schedule issue or something like that. That would be the only determining factor.
Well, I've got these examples of other legislation, the rebuttable presumption
Sure.
one I mentioned, and then there was another bill that came out earlier in 2015 that had, I think, 6 of the 5 reasons that ended up in that statute that we were reading earlier. And I want to go through that and just see which one got dropped off and what language got changed. So
Sure.
I'm still doing quite a bit of research on this and trying to get myself around it. This is I'm in a foreign land talking a foreign language.
This probably
right
seems
now.
like the Twilight Zone to you. This probably doesn't seem like real America stuff.
It's not supposed to work this way. I will tell you that. I've talked to a couple of our attorneys and then our legislative staff and communicate with them back and forth, personal conversations. Just how did we get so far out of whack in some respects? And nobody has a easy solution. Nobody says, "Oh, do this and that'll fix it."
Right.
So there's some good productive conversations taking place. I don't know where it's going to lead, but I know where I'd like to see it lead. I'd like to see it lead to a place where you're having shared custody with your children and not being punished. You are nor any parent being punished for wanting to spend time with their children or being kept out as a pariah. I just don't see how that's
financially ruined.
The 5 encourages the points that we read in the statute.
Right.
It's got to be in the best interest of the child not to have the parents at odds with each other and having one just constantly kind of going at you and creating doubts about your character and who you are in front of your children. That's very unfortunate.
I can't imagine what my children were thinking while they were in the car seeing mommy and daddy and new boyfriend and grandpa and 2 policemen.
Mm-hmm.
For what?
But
there was no reason for it.
Do you want to look at some of the comments? I've seen a couple of them flash up and down. We only have a few more minutes, but I don't want to leave people out who are trying to get in the conversation.
Yeah.
What do you have there?
Here's so we'll just read this one. I have something similar happening here in New York. New York's really bad as far as the courts go. Out of nowhere, I've become an alternate weekend father. I did not sign any papers, nothing. I can't even call my daughter on the phone. The system is broken. How are parents that were allowed to participate, raise, financially provide, who've not run away, who've not abandoned anything, who've said, I'd like more time with my kids. I will take care of the expenses of my home and any shared expenses outside of our home. So two adults, it's 2020, men and ladies. You want equal? Equal is work. Men work hard, ladies work hard. We got to provide for our own homes when we get separated. The other thing is that kids do have expenses outside. So when you talk about insurance, daycare, medication, extracurricular activities, school functions, any of those things, that's where if you can't just figure out what an equitable decision is, then I mean, you got more problems than I mean, how hard is it to figure out? We learned fractions in second grade. Equality is 50-50. If one parent happens to be doing a lot financially better than the other, if one's making 100 grand a year and one's making 40, well, I'm sure if I was making 100 grand a year, I got no problem with chipping a few extra bucks.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That's not the issue. The issue is when 50 and 60% of your income is garnished and you're left to live at your dad's house. This is where I am. And you can't even afford an apartment. And then you're not only homeless, because I am homeless. I'm living in a home, but I know I can't afford it. And, a visitor to your children and you have nothing. Now,
Yeah.
what does that do to mental health?
That section we read with the 5 purposes, I'll call them, is from 50-13.01 in our code.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also the other page I shared with you, 50-13.2, that it talks about entitlement to custody. I want to read one section from that if I can before we get off.
Sure.
So from the first paragraph, it says, an order for custody must include written findings of fact that reflect the consideration of each of these factors mentioned earlier, and that support the determination of what is in the best interest of the child. There's the phrase.
Right.
Between the parents, whether natural or adoptive, no presumption shall apply as to who will better promote the interest and welfare of the child. Joint custody to the parents shall be considered upon the request of either parent. It doesn't say specifically shared parenting, but it's kind of an under the threshold standard that I think talks about shared parenting.
Well, before we finish, would you say that people like myself who have experience in this, including attorneys, could help people like yourself, the representatives and the ones creating these documents and these laws, work on more definitive language, knowing that it seems to be that what we've read, like you said, seems like it's pretty clear to me what we should be doing. The fact that you even needed to write it down is ridiculous, but you did, just so there was, so it was in place. We're a country of laws. And so this is sort of a duh, but you took the time to write the duh down for the duh people. And it seems like this is not clear enough, and that there are opportunities to circumvent this. And that's what, I myself, Mark Ludwig of Americans for Equal Shared Parenting, and other advocates, legislatures, and people in the shared parenting movement, because of our experience, because we know the loopholes and how they're able to circumvent the state laws. Not everybody has this language. But if it can happen to me and this language exists, what do we have a problem? I mean, this is happening in Alamance County, in right here in our courthouse.
That's what the times you've been to court, Chris, do you know how many other cases, custody disputes, were being on the docket that day?
Sure. I think that the last time I was in court, it was in upwards of, gosh, it felt like 30 or 40. And that was just for that day of modification of custody. Then there's custody hearings. There's trial weeks where, they might have, 4, 5, 6, 7 cases on trial that they may or may not get to. When you're not applying the assumption that 50-50 is necessary, and you're leaving attorneys with the ability to litigate, then everybody's in limbo. For a long time, I've been in limbo for 2 years, and her attorney has nothing. And he doesn't want to take me to court to keep me from my kids, because right now he's comfortable. He's going to keep letting me do the work, and he's going to keep dodging everything. And that shouldn't be allowed. That should be illegal. As far as I'm concerned, it is.
Well, I don't know. This reminds me about a phrase I heard years ago that I think of a lot sometimes down in Raleigh. It's ideas have consequences and bad ideas have victims.
Right.
And it's just unfortunate. It's not like I'm unaware of people having divorces and there being disputes over child custody. I'm 64. I worked in the Merchant Marine for 35 years. I met a lot of interesting people in that time. Just myself personally and our immediate family, fortunately, have not been through it. So I'm a stranger in a strange land talking about this, but it doesn't sit well with me.
I tell you what,
I see.
you've given me a lot of time, and I appreciate you having you on tonight. And I'd love to do another one, because there is so much to talk about. And I'd love to help you work on maybe helping with this language, even improve it a little bit more. And when I do get back into court, I'll probably invite you. And if you're available, I'd love for you to be there. I want you to see for yourself. And if you can't come to my hearing, pop in on some of these court hearings and just sit there. And you'd be amazed at the types of performance and stage show that this custody thing really is. So much continuing and nonsense, and parents are fighting for their lives financially, emotionally. There's people commit suicide over these things. Imagine having your kids taken. You've lost a child, and I can't even imagine what that feels like. But I tell you what, somebody once said, a lot of people once said, and I can understand it, that when you're kept away from and alienated from your child, or even just visiting them every other weekend, it feels like mourning the loss of a child that's alive. You're not part of your child's life, but they're here. So on that note, Dennis, is there anything you'd like to say to close out this broadcast? Again, we will have another time to have you back, because I do want to talk more. It feels like an hour should be able to be enough, but I'd love to bring you back for another hour, another time. But what would you like to tell everybody?
Well, give me a couple more weeks to continue the research, because I really want to go back and look at some of the legislation that didn't make it, or that was used as kind of a template for some of the things that we currently have in our statute, and talk to some of the other folks that were here at the time and find out what was the thinking. Why did we go this far, but not all the way to the rebuttable presumption, let's say, of shared parenting? So I've got a lot to learn about it. I'm not, it's not an attack on the legal system or lawyers or judges. It's just trying to find a better path for everybody.
Right.
Because you only get one walk through this life, and trouble in the home can leave an indelible mark on a child's heart. It's a lot of wounded hearts out there, and if we can do something to prevent that, I'd certainly like to be a part of that solution.
That's well said. And on that note, Dennis, thank you so much. We're going to get out of here, and we'll see you guys next for episode 3. And I'll let you know who our special guest is going to be. So good night, everyone. Dennis, thank you so much. If you want to stick around after I end this broadcast, and I'll say goodbye to you, but we'll talk to you guys soon.